I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting my tie, the weight of the day settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat. My name's Grayson Bell, and I just turned 38. 2 years of grinding, late-night sketching designs, pitching to clients who didn't get my vision, and scraping by on coffee and stubbornness had finally paid off. My small architecture firm in Chicago landed a contract to design a community arts center, a project that could put us on the map. It wasn't just a win, it was a lifeline. I wanted to celebrate quietly, maybe a steak and a beer with my wife, Isabel, and a couple of close friends. But Isabel had other ideas. She insisted on throwing a dinner at Maison du Verre, this upscale place downtown with chandeliers that cost more than my car. "You deserve it, Gray," she'd said, her eyes bright with that persuasive spark I'd fallen for 10 years ago. I didn't have the energy to argue. Work had drained me dry, and honestly, I trusted her to handle it. She loved hosting, loved making things perfect. I figured she'd keep it small, elegant, like the dinners we used to have before life got so complicated. The tie looked decent enough, so I stepped into the living room where Isabel was flipping through her phone, her blonde hair pinned up in a way that made her look like she belonged in a magazine. "You sure about this restaurant?" I asked, grabbing my jacket. "It's pricey, and I'd be fine with something low-key." She laughed, not even looking up. "Don't be silly. This is your moment. Let me make it special." Her voice had that finality, like the conversation was already over. I shrugged, chalking it up to her wanting to show off a little. She'd been supportive through the lean years, picking up extra shifts at her marketing job when my firm was barely breaking even. If she wanted to splurge on a fancy dinner, who was I to say no? Still, something nagged at me as I watched her text furiously, her fingers flying over the screen. "Who's all coming?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She waved a hand. "Just the usual Malik, my sister, a few others." "Don't worry about it." I nodded, but the vagueness stuck with me. Malik was my best friend, solid as they come, but her sister, Brielle? That was a wild card. Brielle never showed up alone. She dragged her whole circus with her. We drove to Maison du Verre in silence, the city lights blurring past. I was still riding the high of the contract, picturing the arts center's curved glass facade, the way it'd catch the sunrise. It felt good to build something real, something that'd outlast me. The restaurant came into view, all sleek lines and glowing windows. I parked, and Isabel squeezed my hand. "You ready to be celebrated?" she asked, her smile warm but quick, like she was already thinking about the next thing. I grinned back, ignoring the tightness in my chest. "Guess so." Inside, the hostess led us to a private room, and my jaw nearly dropped. The table was set for way more than a few people, long enough for a wedding reception. Crystal glasses sparkled under soft lighting, and a centerpiece of white orchids screamed money. "Isabel," I started, turning to her. "How many people are coming?" She was already checking her phone again, distracted. "It's fine, Gray. Just relax and enjoy it." Her tone was sweet but firm, like she was soothing a kid. I swallowed my question, not wanting to sound ungrateful. This was supposed to be my night, right? As we waited, I sipped water, the ice clinking against the glass. The room felt too big, too polished, like it was meant for someone else's life. I thought about calling Malik to see if he was on his way, but before I could, the door swung open. In walked Brielle, her husband Jasper trailing behind, their 3 kids bouncing around like they'd just chugged soda. Then came Isabel's cousin Max, his wife, and their toddler. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a dinner, it was a production. I forced a smile as Brielle hugged me, her perfume overwhelming. "Congrats, big shot," she said, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. Jasper clapped my shoulder, and the kids started chasing each other around the table. Isabel beamed, directing everyone to their seats like a conductor. I leaned toward her, keeping my voice low. "I thought you said small." She patted my arm. "It's family, Gray. They're so proud of you." Proud. Half these people hadn't called me in years. I sat down, the chair creaking under me, and tried to shake the feeling that I'd just walked into something I couldn't control. More guests trickled in, an aunt I barely knew, a couple of Brielle's friends, even a guy I vaguely remembered from Isabel's old job. The table filled up, laughter and chatter bouncing off the walls. I caught Isabel's eye, hoping for a moment of connection, something to anchor me in this chaos. She was too busy pouring wine, playing the perfect hostess. My contract, the reason we were here, hadn't even come up. I took a deep breath, telling myself to let it go. Maybe this was her way of showing love, of making sure everyone knew I'd done something big. But as the kids started banging spoons on the table and Brielle ordered a bottle of champagne I knew cost a fortune, that hope started to crack. This wasn't about me. It was about them, about what they could take from a night I'd earned. I gripped my glass a little tighter, watching the room spin out of my control, wondering how I'd let it get this far. I sat at the head of the table, my tie feeling tighter by the second, as the private room at Maison du Verre buzzed with voices I barely recognized. The dinner was supposed to celebrate my big contract, the one I'd bled for over 2 years, but it was already spiraling into something else. Isabel had promised a small gathering, just a few close friends and family to toast my success. I'd pictured Malik raising a beer, maybe my parents calling from out of state to say they were proud. Instead, I was staring at a table that looked like it could seat half of Chicago. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I glanced at it under the table. A text from Brielle, Isabel's sister, popped up. "Hey, where should I put the kids' booster seats?" Booster seats? I blinked at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Kids weren't even supposed to be here. I looked up, catching Isabel adjusting a napkin across the room, her smile bright as she chatted with someone I didn't know. I wanted to ask her what was going on, but before I could stand, another text came through from Brielle. "Also, my friend Tara's bringing her twins." Cool. My jaw clenched. Twins. That'd make at least 6 kids under 10, none of whom I'd signed up for. I leaned back in my chair, the polished wood creaking under me, and tried to piece it together. A week ago, Isabel had shown me a guest list with maybe 10 names: Malik, her parents, a couple of my old college buddies. Simple. Manageable. But now Brielle was texting about seating charts like this was a gala, and I hadn't even seen the final list. I rubbed my temple, the low hum of a headache starting to build. The restaurant's elegance felt like a trap, all gleaming silverware and soft jazz that couldn't drown out the chaos in my head. I'd spent months pitching my architecture firm to clients who didn't believe in me, convincing them my vision for the arts center was worth their money. I'd won that fight. But this felt like a different kind of battle, one I didn't know how to navigate. Isabel caught my eye from across the room and waved, her emerald earrings glinting under the chandelier. I forced a smile, not wanting to seem ungrateful. She'd been so excited about planning this, staying up late to call the restaurant, picking out the menu. I didn't want to ruin her moment, but the math wasn't adding up. I stood and walked over to her, dodging a kid who darted past with a dinner roll in his hand. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice low, "can we talk for a second?" She turned, her dress swishing softly, and tilted her head like I was about to ask for something silly. "Sure, Gray, what's up?" I hesitated, glancing at the growing crowd. Brielle was now herding her 3 kids toward the table, and some woman I didn't know was setting up a high chair. "I thought we agreed on a small dinner," I said, trying to sound casual. "This is starting to look like a lot more than 10 people." Her laugh was light, like I'd told a joke. "Oh, don't be so uptight. It's your night. Everyone wants to celebrate you." She squeezed my arm and turned back to the woman with the high chair, leaving me standing there, words stuck in my throat. Uptight? I wasn't uptight. I was confused. This was supposed to be about my contract, my win, but it felt like I was hosting a reunion for people I barely knew. Back at my seat, I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through Brielle's texts. She'd sent another one. "Max and his wife are bringing their toddler, FYI. So cute. My cousin Max. I hadn't seen him since our wedding, and now he was showing up with a kid I didn't even know existed." I set the phone down, my fingers tapping the tablecloth. The contract had been my focus for so long, every late night, every rejected draft, every meeting where I had to smile through disappointment. I'd earned this moment, and I wanted it to mean something. Not this. Not a free-for-all where I was just the guy footing the bill. I looked at Isabel again, hoping for a sign she'd noticed my discomfort, but she was laughing with Brielle now, clinking glasses like they were at a party I hadn't been invited to. I took a sip of water, the ice cold against my teeth, and tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just how families celebrated, and I needed to loosen up. But then my phone buzzed again, this time with an email from the restaurant. Subject: updated reservation details. I opened it, my stomach sinking as I read the words. Confirmed headcount, 25. 25. I stared at the number, my mind racing. That was more than double what we'd talked about. I glanced at the menu on the table, $1.80 steaks, $30 appetizers, wine bottles that started at $120. My firm was doing okay now, but we weren't swimming in cash. This kind of night could wipe out what I'd set aside for the next project. I wanted to march over to Isabel and demand an explanation, but the room was filling up fast. Brielle's friend Tara walked in with her twins, who immediately started pulling at the tablecloth. Max and his wife followed, their toddler screaming for juice. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and pressed my hands to my face. This wasn't a celebration. It was a takeover. I thought about calling Malik. He'd always been the one to cut through the noise, to tell me when I was letting things slide too far. But he wasn't here yet, and I didn't want to drag him into this mess before he even arrived. Instead, I watched as Isabel floated around the room, greeting each new guest like they were royalty. She looked happy, in her element, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just a prop in her show. The contract, the art center, the years of work, it was all fading into the background, drowned out by the clatter of plates and the whine of kids. I straightened up, forcing myself to breathe. I'd talk to her later, when we were alone. For now, I'd play along, smile, pretend this was what I wanted. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, and it wasn't just the guest list. It was the way nobody seemed to care what this night was supposed to mean to me. I woke up the morning before the big dinner with a knot in my stomach, the kind that feels like you've swallowed a stone. Last night's argument with Isabel was still fresh. She brushed off my concerns about the guest list like I was making a fuss over nothing. 25 people, she'd said, was barely a crowd, and I needed to stop worrying. I wanted to believe her, to trust that this dinner at Maison du Verre was about celebrating my contract, the one I'd poured my soul into for 2 years. My architecture firm was finally getting a foothold, and this art center project was proof I wasn't just dreaming big. I was building something real. But as I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee that had gone cold, I couldn't shake the feeling that this celebration wasn't mine anymore. Isabel was already out, running errands for the dinner, so the house was quiet, giving me too much space to think. I pulled out my phone and texted Malik, my best friend, the one guy who always saw through the fog. "You think I'm overreacting about this party? Feels like it's getting out of hand." His reply came fast. "Man, I told you. They're using your win as a free feast ticket. Watch your wallet." I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the screen. He wasn't wrong, but I didn't want to admit it. Not yet. I set the phone down and leaned back, the chair creaking under me. Malik had been skeptical of Isabel's family for years, ever since her sister Brielle borrowed $1,000 from me for car repairs and never paid it back. He'd warned me about getting sucked into their orbit, how they leaned on me whenever money was tight. But I loved Isabel, and that meant loving her family, too, right? She'd always said they were just close-knit, that I didn't understand because my parents lived halfway across the country and barely called. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being selfish, wanting a quiet night when everyone else was just excited for me. I rubbed my eyes, trying to push the doubt away. The contract was a big deal. My designs would shape a corner of Chicago, give kids a place to paint and perform. I deserved to celebrate that. And if Isabel wanted to go big, I could handle it. Couldn't I? By afternoon, I was at my office, sketching revisions for the Arts Center's courtyard. Work usually steadied me, but today my pencil felt heavy, my lines shaky. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting another text from Brielle about more guests or some last-minute change. Around 3, an email pinged from Maison du Verre. I opened it, and my heart sank. Final headcount confirmation, 31. 31. I laughed out loud, the sound sharp in the empty office. 31 people? We'd gone from 10 to 25 to this? I scrolled through the email, looking for a mistake, but it was clear. Isabel had updated the reservation yesterday. No call, no text, no heads up. Just a quiet decision that turned my night into a banquet. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The math was brutal: $80 entrees, $120 wine bottles, plus whatever the kids ordered. This wasn't a dinner anymore. It was a financial hit I hadn't planned for. My firm was stable, but we weren't rolling in cash. Every dollar from the contract was already earmarked for new hires, software, permits. I couldn't afford to bankroll a party I didn't ask for. I wanted to call Isabel, to ask why she thought this was okay, but I stopped myself. We'd been here before, me questioning her plans, her getting defensive, saying I didn't appreciate her efforts. Last time, I'd ended up apologizing, feeling like a jerk for doubting her. I didn't have the energy for that fight again, not with the dinner tomorrow. Instead, I forwarded the email to Malik with a single line. "Check this out." His response was instant. "You serious? That's a wedding, not a dinner. Shut it down, Gray. Shut it down." The idea stuck with me, tempting but impossible. Canceling now would mean dealing with Isabel's hurt, Brielle's drama, and a dozen relatives who'd already cleared their schedules. I could hear Isabel's voice in my head. "You're embarrassing me over a party?" No, I wasn't going to cancel. I'd grit my teeth and get through it. How bad could one night really be? I left the office early, needing air. The streets of Chicago were alive with rush-hour traffic, horns blaring as I walked toward the lakefront. The water stretched out, gray and endless, and for a moment, I let myself imagine the dinner going smoothly, good food, a few toasts, everyone happy for me. But the image cracked fast. I pictured Brielle's kids running wild, her husband Jasper ordering the most expensive whiskey, random cousins I hadn't seen in years acting like they deserved a front-row seat to my success. Malik's words echoed, a free feast ticket. I stopped walking, hands in my pockets, and stared at the skyline. I'd built a career here, piece by piece, fighting for every inch. This contract was mine, not theirs. Why was I letting them turn it into their party? The thought burned, but I pushed it down. Isabel loved me. She wouldn't let it get out of control. She'd promised to handle everything, and I had to trust her. Didn't I? By the time I got home, Isabel was back, humming as she unpacked groceries. "You okay?" she asked, glancing at me while slicing lemons for some recipe. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Just tired," I said, grabbing a beer from the fridge. She didn't push, just kept humming, and I didn't bring up the email. Instead, I sat on the couch, the TV on low, and tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. 31 people wasn't the end of the world. I could afford one big night, even if it stung. I talked to Isabel after the dinner, set some boundaries, make sure this didn't happen again. For now, I'd play along, show up, smile, let everyone think I was fine with it. But as I sipped my beer, the knot in my stomach grew heavier, and Malik's warning wouldn't leave me alone. "They're using you." I turned up the TV, drowning out the thought, and told myself I'd deal with it tomorrow. One night. I could handle one night. I arrived at Maison du Verre a good half-hour early, wanting a moment to breathe before the chaos descended. The restaurant was everything Isabel had hyped it up to be: polished marble floors, soft lighting that made the crystal glasses glow, and a view of Chicago's skyline that reminded me why I love this city. The maitre d', a tall guy with a crisp suit, greeted me like I was someone important. "Mr. Bell, your private room is ready," he said, leading me down a hallway. I followed, my shoes clicking on the floor, and when he opened the door, I stopped short. The room was stunning. A long table stretched under a chandelier, set with white orchids and gold-rimmed plates. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city lights, and for a second, I felt a surge of pride. This was my night, my win, the contract I'd fought for, the arts center that'd carry my name long after I was gone. I thanked the maitre d' and sat at the head of the table, letting the quiet sink in. For one fleeting moment, I thought maybe Isabel had pulled it off, that this dinner could be what I'd hoped for. That feeling didn't last. I checked my watch, 10 minutes to go, and my phone buzzed with a text from Isabel. "Running a bit late, but we're almost there." We. I didn't even know who we included anymore. The email about the 31-person headcount was still fresh in my mind, and I hadn't had the guts to confront her about it last night. Instead, I'd lain awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my celebration had turned into a parade I didn't sign up for. I took a sip of water, the ice clinking against the glass, and tried to focus on the good. The contract was signed, my firm was growing, and tonight could still be a chance to share that with the people I cared about. Malik would be here soon, and he'd keep me grounded. I just had to get through the evening without losing my cool. The door swung open, and there she was, Isabel, sweeping in like she owned the place, her emerald dress catching the light. She looked beautiful, the way she always did when she was in her element, her blonde hair swept up and a smile that could charm anyone. "Gray, this place is perfect," she said, rushing over to key. I started to respond, but before I could, the rest of the entourage poured in behind her. Brielle, her sister, came first, her heels clicking as she wrangled her 3 kids, who were already tugging at her dress and whining for snacks. Her husband, Jasper, trailed behind, scrolling through his phone like he was late for a meeting. Then came Aunt Lorraine, Isabel's great-aunt, leaning on a cane and muttering about the parking. Cousin Max and his wife showed up next, their toddler strapped to a stroller that barely fit through the door. I stood, forcing a smile, as more faces followed: Brielle's college roommate, some guy I vaguely remembered from a family barbecue, and 2 women I'd never seen before, each with a kid in tow. I counted heads as they filed in, 29 so far. My stomach twisted, but I kept shaking hands, nodding at congratulations that felt more like small talk than anything genuine. Isabel was already playing hostess, directing people to their seats and gushing over the table settings. "Doesn't it look amazing?" she said to no one in particular, her voice carrying over the chatter. I wanted to pull her aside, to ask why we were 2 people short of the 31 she'd confirmed, or why half these guests were strangers to me. But the room was too loud now, kids giggling and adults clinking glasses they'd grabbed from a passing server. Brielle plopped down next to me, her perfume hitting me like a wave. "Big night, huh?" she said, nudging my arm. "You're like a rock star now." I managed a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to me. Rock star? I was just a guy who'd worked his ass off to keep my firm afloat, and this didn't feel like my stage. Jasper sat across from her, already waving for a waiter, while their kids started chasing each other around the table, nearly knocking over a vase. I scanned the room for Malik, hoping he'd walk in and cut through the noise with a joke or a look that'd remind me I wasn't crazy. No sign of him yet. Aunt Lorraine settled at the far end, complaining about the menu font being too small, while Max's toddler banged a spoon on the high chair. Isabel floated between groups, laughing and pouring wine like we were at a charity gala. I caught her eye, trying to signal that I needed a word, but she just winked and turned back to Brielle's roommate, who was showing her something on her phone. The pride I'd felt walking into the room was fading fast, replaced by a slow burn of frustration. This wasn't about my contract. Nobody had even mentioned the arts center, the late nights, the years of doubt I'd pushed through to get here. They were here for the free wine, the fancy plates, the chance to feel important on my dime. I leaned back, gripping the arms of my chair, and tried to steady myself. Maybe I was reading it wrong. Maybe they'd settle down once the food came, and we'd have a real moment, a toast, a nod to what this night meant to me. But as I watched Jasper order a bottle of something I knew cost a fortune and Brielle's kids demand their own menus, that hope felt thinner by the second. The server, a young woman with a polite smile, approached me with a question about appetizers, but I barely heard her. My eyes were on Isabel, still glowing in her role as the perfect host, oblivious to the way this was unraveling. I wanted to stand up, to say something that'd bring it all back to me, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded at the server, told her to bring whatever Isabel had picked, and sank back into my seat. The room kept spinning. Laughter, clinking glasses, kids shouting, and I was just the guy at the head of the table, watching my night slip away. I sat at the head of the table, the private room at Maison du Verre humming with noise that felt like it was pressing against my skull. The dinner was in full swing now, and any hope I'd had of this being my celebration, the one for the contract I'd fought 2 years to win, was gone. The table was a chaotic spread of half-empty wine glasses, crumpled napkins, and plates piling up faster than the servers could clear them. Isabel was across the room, laughing as she poured more wine for her cousin Max, her emerald dress shimmering like she was the star of this show. I gripped my fork, staring at the $80 steak on my plate that I hadn't even touched. The contract, the arts center, the late-night sketching until my hands cramped. None of it had come up. Instead, I was surrounded by 29 people, most of whom I barely knew, treating my night like an open bar at a wedding they weren't invited to. Brielle's kids were the loudest, their voices cutting through the chatter as they demanded virgin cocktails with fancy garnishes. "Can we get more cherries?" one of them shouted, waving a glass at a server who looked like she was ready to quit. Jasper, Brielle's husband, was no better, ordering another round of whiskey like he was at a dive bar, not a place where every drink cost more than my weekly grocery bill. I did the math in my head, $1.20 wine bottles disappearing by the minute, $30 appetizers ordered in doubles, and now these kids' platters that came with 5 courses each. I'd seen the menu when Isabel booked the place. A single kid's meal was $40, and there were 6 children here, all under 10, acting like they were at a buffet. My stomach churned as I watched the bill climb in my mind. Already past $9,000 before the main courses were even done. $9,000. For a night that was supposed to be about me. Brielle raised her glass from across the table, her bracelets jangling. "To our generous Grayson," she called out, her voice syrupy with praise that didn't land right. A few people cheered, glasses clinking, but it felt hollow, like they were toasting the meal, not the man. Isabel beamed, joining in with a "hear, hear." While Aunt Lorraine nodded from the far end, her plate already cleared of a second helping of lobster. Generous? I hadn't invited these people. I hadn't told them to order the most expensive things on the menu or to treat the servers like personal assistants. I wanted to stand up, to say something that'd stop this train wreck, but my throat felt tight, my hands heavy. Instead, I forced a smile, nodding like I was in on the joke, while inside I was screaming. Nobody said thank you. Nobody asked about the contract, about what it meant to me to finally land something this big. They just kept eating, drinking, laughing, like I was the bankroller of their good time. I glanced at Isabel again, hoping for a sign she saw how wrong this was, but she was too busy playing hostess, encouraging Max's wife to try the truffle risotto. Go wild, she said, her laugh bright and carefree. Go wild. The words hit me like a punch. She'd planned this, invited all these people, and now she was egging them on, knowing every order was another dent in our savings. My firm was doing okay, but we weren't rich. Every dollar from the contract was supposed to go back into the business. New hires, better software, a cushion for the lean months. I'd trusted her to keep this reasonable, to make it about us, about what I'd built. Instead, she'd turned it into a circus, and I was the clown footing the bill. I pushed my plate away, the steak cold now, and took a long sip of water, trying to cool the anger building in my chest. The kids were getting louder, one of them spilling juice on the tablecloth, while Betrayal scrolled through her phone, barely noticing. Jasper leaned back, his tie loosened, telling some story about his job that nobody was listening to. Max's toddler started banging a spoon, and Aunt Lorraine called for another glass of wine, her third by my count. I watched it all like I was outside my own life, a spectator to a party I didn't want. Malik still hadn't shown up, and I needed him here, needed his blunt honesty to pull me back from the edge. I checked my phone under the table. No texts, no calls. Just me, stuck in this room, watching my night unravel. The servers moved fast, their faces tight with forced politeness as they juggled orders for steak, lobster, and desserts nobody needed. I caught one of them looking at me, her eyes sympathetic, like she knew I was in over my head. I wanted to tell her she had no idea. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and tried to think straight. This wasn't just about the money, though that hurt plenty. It was the expectation, the way everyone assumed I'd cover it all without a word. Isabel hadn't even checked in with me, hadn't asked if I was okay with her sister's kids ordering like royalty or her aunt treating the wine list like a challenge. I'd spent years building my firm, proving I could stand on my own, and now I was just the guy who paid for everyone else's fun. The thought burned, sharp and bitter. I wanted to grab Isabel, to pull her outside and ask why she thought this was okay. But she was too deep in the crowd now, laughing with Betrayal's roommate about something I couldn't hear. I was alone at the head of the table, surrounded by people who didn't see me, didn't care what this night was supposed to mean. I took another sip of water, the glass slick with condensation, and told myself to hold it together. The night wasn't over. Maybe there'd be a toast, a moment where someone acknowledged what I'd done, why we were here. But as I watched another bottle of wine get uncorked and heard Jasper call for the good stuff, that hope felt like a lie. This wasn't my celebration. It was theirs, and I was just the guy stuck with the tab. I set the glass down, my hand steady even though my mind wasn't, and decided I wasn't going to let it in like this. I didn't know how yet, but I wasn't going to be their doormat, not tonight, not ever again. I sat there, the clatter of plates and laughter in the private room at Maison Duvert swallowing any chance of clear thought. The dinner had turned into a free-for-all, with $120 wine bottles vanishing like water and kids ordering 5-course meals as if this was a theme park. My untouched steak sat cold on the plate, a reminder of the night I'd lost. Isabel was still floating around, pouring wine and laughing like this was the best party she'd ever thrown, while I watched the bill in my head climb past $9,000. $9,000 for a celebration that wasn't even about me. The contract, the art center, the years of late nights and rejected drafts, nobody had mentioned any of it. I was just the guy at the head of the table, expected to smile and pay for everyone's good time. My hands curled into fists under the tablecloth, the frustration boiling hotter with every clink of a glass. I couldn't let this go on, not without doing something to take back control. I scanned the room, looking for a way out of the noise. Isabel was too caught up, joking with her cousin Max about dessert options, and Betrayal was snapping photos of her kids' virgin cocktails, oblivious to the chaos they were causing. Jasper was already slurring, waving for another whiskey, while Aunt Lorraine picked at her third helping of lobster like it was her birthright. I needed a moment to think, a way to stop this train before it ran me over completely. That's when I noticed the server, a young woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Cecilia, clearing plates nearby. She moved quietly, dodging a kid who darted past with a bread roll, her face calm despite the madness around her. I caught her eye, and she gave me a small nod, like she could tell I was drowning. An idea hit me, sharp and risky, but it felt like my only shot. I stood, my chair scraping softly against the floor, and walked towards Cecilia, keeping my steps casual so nobody would notice. She was stacking plates at a side table, and I leaned in close enough to keep my voice low. "Excuse me," I said, glancing back to make sure Isabel was still distracted. Cecilia turned, her expression polite but attentive. "Yes, sir," she asked, setting down a plate. I took a breath, steadying myself. "Would you be able to prepare separate checks for everyone tonight?" Her brow lifted slightly, just enough to show she understood what I was asking. Separate checks for 29 people, after they'd spent the last hour ordering like money didn't exist. It wasn't a small request. "It might take a little time to sort out," she said carefully, "but I can make it happen." "You're sure?" I nodded, my pulse picking up. "Absolutely. And one more thing, put my meal and the room fee on my card. Just mine." I pulled out my wallet, sliding my credit card across the table to her. She took it, her fingers quick and discreet, and gave me a look that was half sympathy, half respect. "Got it," she said. "I'll handle it." I thanked her and walked back to my seat, my heart pounding but my head clearer than it had been all night. Separate checks. It wasn't just about the money, though God knows that was part of it. It was about making them see this wasn't my burden to carry alone. Isabel had invited these people, turned my night into their feast, and I was done being the silent sponsor. I sat down, picking up my water glass to hide the shake in my hands. Nobody noticed I'd stepped away. They were too busy laughing, eating, ordering more. Brielle's youngest was now drawing on a napkin with a butter knife, while Jasper told a loud story about his golf game that nobody cared about. Isabel caught my eye from across the table and smiled, like everything was perfect. I smiled back, but it didn't reach my eyes. She had no idea what I'd just done, and for the first time all night, that gave me a strange kind of power. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, and let the room's chaos wash over me. Cecilia was good. She didn't miss a beat, circling the table with refills while quietly tallying orders in her head. I was sure. I wondered how they'd react when the checks came, when they realized I wasn't picking up the tab for their lobster and whiskey. Would Isabel be embarrassed? Angry? Would Brielle try to laugh it off? Or would Jasper make a scene? I didn't know, and part of me didn't care. This wasn't about revenge. It was about drawing a line. I'd spent years saying yes to Isabel's family, covering their emergencies, their upgrades, their just this once favors. Tonight was supposed to be different, a moment for me, and they'd taken that away. Separate checks were my way of saying enough. The thought of Malik crossed my mind, and I checked my phone again. No texts, no sign of him. I needed his perspective, his blunt way of cutting through the mess, but he was still a no-show. Maybe he'd sensed this disaster coming and bailed. I couldn't blame him. I took a sip of water, the ice long melted, and watched Cecilia move toward the kitchen, my card probably already in her hand. The bill was coming, and with it, a reckoning I hadn't planned but couldn't avoid. Isabel laughed again, her voice rising over the chatter as she urged Max's wife to try the chocolate soufflé. "It's to die for," she said, and I almost laughed at the irony. To die for. This whole night was killing me, and she didn't even see it. I set the glass down, my fingers steady now, and settled into wait. The food kept coming: steaks, desserts, more wine, and the room grew louder, but I felt detached, like I was watching it all from somewhere else. Cecilia would bring the checks soon, and when she did, this night would shift. I didn't know how they'd react, but I knew one thing. I wasn't backing down. This was my celebration, my contract, my life, and I was done letting them spend it like it belonged to them. For the first time all evening, I felt like I was sitting at the head of the table, not just filling a seat. I sat at the head of the table, the private room at Maison du Verre still buzzing with the kind of chaos that felt like it could spill over into the street. Plates were piled high with half-eaten desserts, wine glasses sat empty or tipped over, and the kids, 6 of them, all under 10, were now racing around, giggling as they dodged servers. Isabel was in her element, laughing with her sister Brielle about something I couldn't hear, her emerald dress catching the chandelier's light. My stomach was tight, not from hunger but from the weight of what I'd just done. I'd asked Cecilia, the server with the kind eyes, to split the bill into separate checks, 29 of them, one for each guest who'd spent the night treating my celebration like a free buffet. My card was already charged for my meal and the room fee, nothing more. The decision felt like a lifeline, a way to claw back control of a night that had slipped away from me. Now, I just had to wait for the fallout. The air in the room was thick with chatter and clinking silverware, but I felt oddly calm, like I'd stepped outside the storm. Nobody suspected a thing, not Isabel, not Betrayal, not Jasper, who was slouched in his chair, nursing another whiskey. They were all too caught up in their own fun, ordering gelato flights for the kids and extra rounds of coffee like the night would never end. I kept my eyes on Cecilia, watching her move with quiet efficiency, clearing plates and refilling water glasses. She hadn't come back with the checks yet, but I knew she was working on it. Every time she passed, she gave me a small nod, discreet enough that nobody else would notice. It was like we had a secret, and that kept me steady, even as my pulse thrummed with anticipation. I'd spent years letting Isabel's family lean on me, paying for their emergencies, their vacations, their just until we're back on our feet loans. Tonight was supposed to be about my contract, the arts center I'd fought to design, but they'd turned it into their party. I was done. I took a sip of water, the glass cool against my lips, and scanned the table. Rielle's kids were smearing chocolate on their napkins, while her friends' twins argued over a toy one of them had dropped. Aunt Lorraine was picking at a second dessert, muttering about how the portions were too small, and Max's toddler was banging a spoon on the high chair, his parents too busy chatting to care. Jasper raised his glass for another toast, his third, by my count, mumbling something about success that didn't even mention me. Isabel clapped along, her smile wide, oblivious to the fact that nobody had asked about my work, my win, the reason we were here. The bill was probably past $10,000 now, with all the extra orders, and not one of them had offered to chip in. Not one had said thank you. I set the glass down, my hand steady, and let that sink in. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect, and I was tired of being the guy who gave it without getting any back. Cecilia appeared from the kitchen, a stack of black leather folders in her hands, and my heart kicked up a notch. This was it. She moved around the table, placing a folder in front of each adult with the same polite smile she'd worn all night. I watched as people barely noticed, too busy laughing or scooping up the last of their soufflé. Isabel was the first to pick hers up, flipping it open mid-sentence. Her smile froze. "What's this?" she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. She held up the check, her eyes darting to me. Betrayal grabbed hers next, her jaw dropping. "Our check alone is $1,300, she gasped, loud enough for heads to turn. Jasper snatched his, squinting like it was written in another language. "Ours is over $2,000. Aunt Lorraine's voice boomed from the end of the table. "What's going on here?" The room went quiet, all eyes swinging toward me. Isabel stood, her folder trembling in her hand. "Grayson," she said, her tone a mix of shock and accusation. I pushed my chair back and stood, buttoning my jacket slowly, deliberately. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. "I only paid for myself," I said, my voice calm but firm, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And the rest is on you." The silence was deafening. Brielle's mouth hung open, her kids oblivious as they slurped their gelato. Jasper half rose, his face red. "You serious?" he sputtered. Isabel took a step toward me, her eyes wide, like I'd just pulled the rug out from under her. "Gray, what are you doing?" she whispered, but it wasn't a whisper. It carried, and I saw Max and his wife exchange a glance. I didn't flinch. "I didn't invite all of you," I said, looking around the table, meeting every pair of eyes. "I didn't tell your kids to order lobster or you to go through 10 bottles of wine. This was supposed to be my night. You made it yours, so you can pay for it." Nobody moved. Cecilia stood by the door, her hands clasped, watching like she was ready to step in if things got ugly. I didn't care if they yelled or begged. I wasn't backing down. For once, I wasn't the guy who'd smooth things over, who'd cover the cost to keep the peace. Isabel's face was pale, her lips parted like she was searching for words that wouldn't come. Betrayal clutched her check, muttering something about unbelievable, while Jasper just stared at me, his whiskey glass forgotten. Aunt Lorraine huffed, crossing her arms, and Max leaned back, his toddler still banging that damn spoon. I turned to Cecilia and nodded. "Thank you," I said, loud enough for the room to hear. Then I walked toward the door, my steps steady, the weight of their shock trailing behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I'd said what I needed to say, and for the first time all night, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. I stepped out of the private room at Maison du Verre, the heavy door closing behind me with a soft thud, cutting off the stunned silence I'd left in my wake. The cool air of the restaurant's hallway hit me like a splash of water, and for a second, I just stood there, my heart still racing from what I'd done. I'd told them, Isabel, Brielle, Jasper, all 29 of them, that I'd only paid for my meal and the room fee. Separate checks for everyone else, for their $120 wine bottles, their kids' lobster orders, their endless rounds of desserts. I'd walked out without yelling, without making a scene, but the weight of it all clung to me as I moved toward the exit. The city lights blinked through the restaurant's windows, and I could hear the faint hum of Chicago outside, alive and indifferent to the bomb I'd just dropped. My phone was already buzzing in my pocket, but I didn't check it. I needed air, distance, a moment to feel like myself again. I pushed through the front door and stepped onto the sidewalk, the night sharp and crisp against my skin. The street was busy, taxis honking, couples laughing as they spilled out of bars, but it felt quieter than the chaos I'd left behind. I leaned against the building's brick wall, my breath visible in the chilly air, and let the reality sink in. I'd done it. I'd drawn a line, said no to being the family's endless wallet, to letting my celebration be hijacked. The contract, the art center, the years of grinding to build my firm, it was mine, and I'd finally stood up for it. But the victory didn't feel clean. Isabel's face, pale, shocked, like I'd betrayed her, kept flashing in my mind. Brielle's gasp, Jasper's half-drunk glare, Aunt Lorraine's huff. They looked at me like I was the villain, not the guy who'd just been pushed too far. I rubbed my hands together, trying to shake the doubt creeping in. Had I gone too far? Should I have warned them first, given Isabel a chance to fix it? I shoved the thoughts down. No, this had been coming for years. My phone buzzed again, insistent, and I pulled it out. A text from Isabel. You can't be serious. Then another. This is over $9,000, Gray. How could you do this? I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. $9,274.19, to be exact. I'd seen the rough total when Cecilia handed me my card back. $9,000 for a night that was supposed to be about me, turned into their feast. I typed a response. I didn't invite them. I didn't order their food. This was my night. But I deleted it before sending. What was the point? She wouldn't get it. Not now. Not with her family whispering in her ear about how I'd humiliated them. Another text came through. This one from Brielle. You really screwed us over. My kids are freaking out. I almost laughed. Her kids, who'd been gorging on gelato and virgin cocktails, were freaking out? I locked the phone and shoved it back in my pocket, the anger flaring again. They didn't get to guilt me. Not after treating me like an ATM for years. I started walking, my shoes clicking on the pavement, no destination in mind, just movement to keep my head clear. The city's noise wrapped around me, grounding me as I replayed the moment I'd stood up. I only paid for myself, I'd said, my voice steady, every word deliberate. I could still see Jasper's face, red and sputtering, half rising like he wanted to fight me. You can't be serious, he'd said, like I owed him an explanation. Isabel's whisper, Gray, what are you doing? Cut deeper, but I'd held my ground. And I'd replied, looking right at her. I didn't tell the kids to order lobster and filet mignon. You turned it into a circus. It wasn't just about the money, though that stung plenty. It was about them assuming I'd take it, that I'd smile and pay for their excess without a word. I told Cecilia to make sure every bill was settled before anyone left, then walked out, leaving them to face the consequences. It felt right in the moment, but now, alone on the street, I wondered what came next. I turned a corner, passing a diner with neon signs and a couple smoking outside. My phone kept buzzing, more texts, probably voicemails now, but I didn't check. I could imagine the scene back at the restaurant. Brielle complaining to anyone who'd listen, Isabel trying to smooth things over, Jasper muttering about how he'd deal with me later. Aunt Lorraine would be grumbling about her $600 tab, and Max would probably just pay quietly, embarrassed to be caught in the middle. I didn't feel sorry for them. They'd ordered like money grew on trees, knowing full well I was the one signing the contract that paid for this night. My contract. My win. The art center I designed, the one that'd give kids a place to create, to dream, it hadn't even come up. Not one toast, not one question about what it meant to me. I stopped walking, my breath catching as the truth hit harder. They didn't care. Not about me. not about what I'd built. They cared about the free meal, the fancy room, the chance to play high rollers on my dime. I leaned against a street lamp, the cold metal pressing into my back, and closed my eyes. Malik's warning from yesterday echoed in my head. They're using your party as a feast ticket. He'd seen it coming, and I'd brushed him off, too tired to argue, too hopeful to believe it. Where was he tonight? He hadn't shown up, hadn't texted. Maybe he'd known it'd be a mess and stayed clear. I couldn't blame him. I wished I'd listened, wished I'd pushed back when Isabelle first mentioned Maison du Verre, when Betrayal started texting about seating charts. But wishing didn't change anything. I'd made my move, and now I had to live with it. I straightened up, my jaw tight, and started walking again, faster this time, like I could outrun the noise in my head. Isabelle's texts, Betrayal's whining, the $9,274 bill, they didn't get to define me. Not tonight. I'd taken a stand, and whatever came next, I'd face it on my terms. I got home from Maison du Verre just past 11, the house dark and quiet except for the hum of the fridge. My keys clattered on the counter as I kicked off my shoes, the weight of the night still pressing down on me. I'd walked out of the restaurant after dropping the bomb separate checks for everyone, my meal and the room fee the only things on my card. $9,000 worth of their lobster, wine, and kids' desserts wasn't my problem anymore. The stunned faces, Isabelle's shock, Betrayal's gasp, Jasper's glare followed me all the way home, but I didn't regret it. Not yet. I sank onto the couch, the leather creaking under me, and stared at the ceiling. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since I left, a relentless stream of texts and voicemails I wasn't ready to face. I knew what they'd say. I'd embarrassed them, ruined the night, acted like a selfish jerk. I didn't care. Or at least, I was trying not to. I pulled out my phone, the screen lighting up with notifications, 17 texts, 4 voicemails, a group chat blowing up with names I barely recognized. Isabelle's messages were at the top. How could you leave like that? Followed by, everyone's humiliated. Gray. You need to fix this. Fix it? I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the empty room. Fix what? The fact that her family treated my celebration like a buffet they didn't have to pay for? The contract, the art center, the years I'd spent building my firm from nothing, none of it had mattered to them. I'd stood up for myself, and now I was the bad guy. Typical. Betrayal's texts were worse. You traumatized my kids. They're crying because we couldn't pay right away. Real classy, Grayson. Traumatized? Her kids, who'd been slurping $15 virgin cocktails and smearing gelato on the tablecloth, were fine. I scrolled past her messages, my thumb shaking with the urge to reply, to tell her to grow up and take responsibility for once. But I didn't. Not yet. A voicemail from my mom popped up, and I hesitated before playing it. Her voice was soft, laced with disappointment. Grayson, your dad and I heard what happened. You should have known it'd turn out like this with Isabelle's family. Call us tomorrow. I set the phone down, my chest tight. Should have known. They weren't wrong. Isabelle's family had a history of leaning on me, from Betrayal's loans to her parents' endless home repairs I'd covered. But hearing it from my mom, who'd always kept her distance from my marriage, stung in a way I hadn't expected. They hadn't been at the dinner, hadn't seen how it felt to sit at a table full of people who didn't care about my win. I rubbed my face, trying to push the guilt away. I'd done what I had to do. Why did it feel like I was the one apologizing? Another text came through, this one from Malik, my best friend who'd been a no-show at the restaurant. Just 3 words. You good? I stared at it, the first message that didn't feel like an attack. Malik had warned me days ago that Isabelle's family was using my party as a feast ticket, and I brushed him off, too tired to argue. Now I wished I'd listened. I typed back 1 word, finally, and hit send, hoping he'd get what I meant. Finally free, finally done being the guy who paid for everyone else's mess. I leaned back, the couch cushion sinking under me, and let the quiet settle in. The house felt bigger without Isabelle here. She was probably still at the restaurant, smoothing things over, playing the peacemaker while her family trashed me. I didn't care. Let them talk. I was tired of being their doormat. The phone buzzed again, another voicemail, this time from Isabelle. I almost ignored it, but something made me press play. Her voice was shaky, not angry but raw, like she'd been crying. Gray, I can't believe you did this. You humiliated me in front of everyone. $9,000? And you just walked out? We need to talk. I'm staying at Betrayal's tonight. The message cut off, and I sat there, the words sinking in. She was staying at Betrayal's, not coming home to face me, not trying to understand why I'd snapped, just running to her sister, who'd probably spend the night fueling her anger. I should have felt guilty, but all I felt was tired. Tired of her family's expectations, tired of her defending them, tired of pretending I could keep carrying it all. I deleted the voicemail and turned off the phone, the screen going dark. I got up and grabbed a beer from the fridge, the cold glass steadying me as I walked to the window. Chicago's skyline stretched out, a mix of steel and light that reminded me why I'd stayed, why I'd fought for my firm. The Arts Center was real now, my designs, my vision, a place where kids could create something bigger than themselves. That's what tonight was supposed to be about, not $9,000 worth of wine and steak. I took a sip, the bitterness of the beer matching the taste in my mouth. I kept seeing Isabel's face when I'd stood up, the way she looked at me like I'd broken something sacred. Maybe I had. Maybe this was the start of something breaking for good. The thought scared me, but it also felt like relief, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even know was there until I set it down. I sat back on the couch, the beer half gone, and closed my eyes. The night played over in my head, the clinking glasses, Brielle's fake toast, Cecilia's quiet nod when I'd asked for separate checks. I'd walked out with my head high, but now, alone, I couldn't help wondering what tomorrow would bring. Isabel would come home eventually, and we'd have to talk, really talk, not just her deflecting or me swallowing my frustration. Brielle would probably never speak to me again, and Jasper might try to play tough, but they'd get over it. Or they wouldn't. Either way, I wasn't going back to the way things were. I'd spent too long saying yes to everyone else, letting my life get eaten up by their needs. Tonight wasn't just about a dinner, it was about me finally saying no. I finished the beer, set the bottle down, and leaned back, the quiet of the house wrapping around me like a promise. Whatever came next, I'd face it as my own man, not their ATM. A week after the dinner at Maison du Verre, I was sitting in my office, the morning light slanting through the blinds as I reviewed sketches for the Arts Center. The quiet was a relief after days of chaos, texts, voicemails, and group chats that felt like a never-ending trial for what I'd done. I told everyone at the restaurant they were on their own for the $9,274 bill, paid only for my meal and the room fee, and walked out. Isabel hadn't come home that night, staying at her sister Brielle's instead, and the silence between us had stretched into days. My phone was off now, tucked in a drawer to keep the noise at bay. I needed space to think, to figure out what came next after drawing a line I'd never drawn before. The contract, the reason for that cursed dinner, was still mine, a chance to build something lasting with my firm. But everything else, my marriage, my ties to Isabel's family, felt like it was hanging by a thread. The office door swung open around 10, and there she was. Isabel, her coat slung over one arm, her face tight with a mix of anger and exhaustion. I hadn't seen her since the restaurant, hadn't answered her texts or calls, not because I was avoiding her, but because I didn't know what to say. She shut the door behind her, the click loud in the small room, and stood there, staring at me like I was a stranger. "You couldn't even call me back," she said, her voice sharp but shaky, like she was holding back tears. I set my pencil down, leaning back in my chair, and met her eyes. "I needed time," I said simply, keeping my tone even. Her laugh was bitter, cutting. "Time? You humiliated me, Gray. You left me with a $9,000 mess in front of my whole family. Brielle had to borrow money to cover her check. Aunt Lorraine's still talking about it. And you needed time." I didn't flinch, though her words stung. I'd known this was coming, but hearing it still felt raw, like a bruise I hadn't noticed until it was pressed. I stood, walking to the window to put some distance between us. The city sprawled below, busy and alive, a reminder of why I'd fought so hard for my firm. "It wasn't about humiliating you," I said, my back to her. "It was about me. That night was supposed to be for the contract, for what I've built. You turned it into a circus, 31 people, half of them I didn't even know, ordering like money didn't matter. When was I supposed to say enough?" She didn't answer right away, and I turned to face her. Her arms were crossed, her lips pressed tight, but her eyes were softer now, like she was searching for something to hold on to. "I thought I was doing something nice," she said finally, her voice quieter. "I thought you'd want everyone there, celebrating you." I shook my head, the frustration bubbling up. They didn't celebrate me. They didn't even ask about the contract. They toasted their free meal, Isabel, and you let them. She took a step forward, her coat slipping to the floor. "So you punish me? You punish my family? You could have talked to me, Gray, not made a scene and walked out." I wanted to laugh, but it caught in my throat. Talk to her? I'd tried days before, when I'd asked about the guest list, when I'd told her it was getting out of hand. She'd brushed me off, called me uptight, told me to relax. I didn't say that, though. Instead, I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd put together over the weekend. Bank statements, receipts, a record of every time I'd bailed out her family. I set it on the desk, the papers fanning out. This isn't just about the dinner, I said, my voice steady. I've paid for Brielle's rent 6 times. Your parents' plumbing, their car repairs, the wedding upgrade you wanted, the SUV deposit when you said we needed something practical. When was the last time you did anything for me without strings? Her eyes widened, flicking to the folder, then back to me. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't push, didn't yell. Just let the question hang there, heavy and unanswered. For years, I'd been the one to give, to fix, to cover the gaps when her family came calling. I'd done it because I loved her, because I thought that's what you did when you build a life together. But love wasn't supposed to feel like a 1A street, and I was done walking it alone. Isabel sank into the chair across from my desk, her hands twisting in her lap. I didn't know it felt like that, she said finally, her voice small. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I wanted to believe her, but wanting wasn't enough anymore. The next day, I filed for separation. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. Every part of me ached as I signed the papers, but I knew it was right. Isabel didn't fight it, didn't call or show up again. 2 months later, I took a solo trip to the Alps, just me and a backpack, hiking trails where the air was so clean it hurt my lungs. The mountains didn't care about my mistakes or my marriage. They just were, steady and unchanging. I came back clearer, stronger, ready to rebuild on my own terms. I changed the locks on the house, sold the SUV we'd bought together, and poured myself into the arts center. It wasn't easy, nights were long, and the quiet sometimes felt like a weight, but it was mine. That night at the restaurant, I'd paid for one meal, but I'd bought something bigger, my freedom. I wasn't the family ATM anymore. I was just Grayson, figuring out who he was without everyone else's hands in his pockets.